Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today it is time for Friday Reads on January. I think this is the last Friday of January, right? Yes, I had to go check. It's January 27th. I thought it was the 26th. Wait, I'm checking again. It is the 26th. I looked at the calendar wrong. Wow, I'm off to a great start. Just when I got into the groove of thinking about the new year, it's moving forward. We're already going into the next month. Oh my gosh. Okay. I even thought of another New Year's resolution last night when I was having a family conversation that I want to learn how to make my own veggie burgers instead of buying the ones from the store like the Boca burgers and all that. We've enjoyed those forever, but I feel like I want to move away from the extra ingredients that are in those kind of processed foods and make my own. And I have the time. It was always a convenience factor, but I don't really have that excuse anymore since I'm retired. So I am going to learn to make my own. I can make a big batch of them, make a couple of different flavors and freeze them. So doesn't this sound ambitious? I'll let you know how it turns out. All right, guess what? I'm hot. I have to take off this sweater. It's warm again down here in the coastal bend. That brief interlude of winter came through, killed some plants and left, and now it is warm again. So what's been going on this week? Let me know in the comments anything exciting that you want to share. I don't have anything exciting to share. So let's just move on to the usual events here. TV shows. Okay, I'm kind of shopping for a show. We have the only one that's really a new one that's going right now is True Detective, which is really good. And I found out this week, if you have been watching this, it's been so long since season 1 that I didn't even register any of this, but there's a whole bunch of articles floating around online about the connections between season 1, that was the one with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, and then the current season. And they are pretty significant. So go, if you're interested in this, go and check that out. So we are watching that. It's really good. Jodie Foster is excellent as a detective that has alienated everybody she's ever worked with and everybody in town. She's so gruff and grouchy and defensive and nobody likes her, but yet she's funny and she's an excellent teacher to her young partner. And so anyway, it's very good. Also, just watching some old episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm because we used to watch it and then we didn't, and now we're watching some that are from several years ago. We're kind of shopping for a good sort of mystery show, Broadchurch, Shetland kind of show, or else we like a speculative show that's not too silly. And these are my stipulations. And our channels that we have are Hulu, Max, Apple, and Netflix. So yeah, that's what we're looking for. So if you have any recommendations, shoot them down below. I have found some good shows that way in the past. So thanks in advance if you have any ideas. Let's move on to books because this is a book channel, right? What have I been reading this week? Well, I did finish the 2 books that I was in the middle of last week. We had Jane Austen, A Life by Carol Shields. This was my nonfiction selection for January, a short biography of Jane Austen. I really enjoyed this. This was just the right length and amount of material that I didn't know before or that I found her discussion intriguing. It was just the right amount for me. And so in this book, we get the usual kind of overview of Jane Austen's life and the correlation to when she was writing her different novels. And then we also just get some interesting light commentary and critique of her life, her work, and the responses to her life and work from Carol Shields, who, of course, is an excellent novelist in her own right. And one thing that I took away from this that I really thought about was how Jane Austen had no society of writers in her life, and how a writer today has access. Maybe they are in a writing program, a formal MFA program. Maybe they're in an informal writers group, or they have some class they can take, or they find a support group online, or they have a channel and they're involved with there's a writing tube, isn't there? So People have avenues to connect with other writers and talk about the creative process and share ideas or even share manuscripts and things like that. And she didn't have anything like that. There was, of course, societies of writers in that day, but she did not have access to this as a single woman living with her family in the countryside on very limited means. So even though she was an avid reader herself, she didn't have that kind of intellectual company to talk about writing. It just wasn't there. So it just kind of makes her achievement even the more. When you think that she only went to school formally until she was 11 years old and always lived at home, she shared a bedroom with her sister until the day she died, and that she could write such accomplished observations of that society. It's really remarkable. So I enjoyed this very much. And it just makes me really keen to want to read some Jane Austen. I read one or two a year, and it's just in a rotation. And Sense and Sensibility is coming up next in my little personal rotation, and so I'll probably get into that sooner rather than later. The other book I finished was Riambel by Priya Hein, and I talked about this some last week. It's a story set in Mauritius, and it's about a girl named Noemi who is a teenage girl living with her mother in a very impoverished part of town. That basically there's a divide in the town between the wealthy descendants of the French landholders and slave owners, the sugar plantation owners, and then there are the working class, the service class that works for those people, and they tend to be descended from the enslaved people. And they're still living in this unequal duality and rampant racism, classism. Noemi is learning in school about this history and about art and culture and writing, and she's inspired, and she has some teachers that really bring things to life for her. But she's also being pulled into the undertow that people in her socioeconomic group tend to fall into. Her grandmother worked for this wealthy family. Her mother works for them. She's expecting Noemi to come and work for them too. And we can see some hazards coming from a mile away that Noemi doesn't quite understand. It's a beautifully written book, and I really like the interspersed short passages that are from the past, from women's lives in the time of slavery, and then the recipes. So we get history, we get culture, but it's woven together very nicely. It's very sad. I think my only problem with this book is I was hoping for more. That there are some teachers, from the teachers, not from the overall book, but there's these teachers that are specifically highlighted that notice Noemi's intellect, her talent, her hungry mind, and I was hoping for something more from these characters that didn't quite pan out. But it's a beautifully written book. The other book that's ongoing is my albatross, Bleak House. The struggle is real. The struggle is real. Okay, here's my problem with Bleak House. Well, I've had an off and on problem with Bleak House, but every time it picks up and gets interesting, or there's a wonderfully written passage that I want to stop and read again, or there's a funny part, or something that gets me engaged, it disappears again in another chapter, and we're off on another side trail. And I will admit that this book is not faring well in competition with whatever else I'm reading at the same time. I'm having trouble balancing it out and making time for it because I'm always drawn by the other book I'm reading. And this one, I don't have that feeling that I need to have of, oh, I'm looking forward to getting back into it. It's more like, okay, I need to sit down and read some of this book. And that's not the reading vibe that I really want in my life. So I'm on page 406 now. So right now I'm persevering out of sheer obstinacy, not for love of this novel. even though I have liked it in fits and starts. So that is kind of where I'm at. I'm still not quite halfway, and I have never read a book so slowly in my entire life. So I don't know. I don't know. That's all I can say right now. I wish I was loving it, but I'm not. Let's just admit it. Then I finished another book, or I started and finished, or what am I trying to say? I read this book. I read this book this week. And this is My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout. It's kind of catching the light here because it has gold lettering. And this is a planned reread that I am doing of the Lucy Barton, right now, quartet of books. And so this was the beginning of that. And this is also my last book that I actually had planned in my January TBR. So somehow I finished all the things that I laid out to do. When does this ever happen? I mean, there it is. It's January. It's not going to happen again all year. Lucy is a writer who lives in New York City. And in this book, the first book of the quartet, she is reflecting from a later point about an incident that happened when she was younger, when she had not yet published a book. She had published a couple of short stories, and she was a young mother and wife. She was married to her first husband, William, and her two daughters were very young, and she experienced a serious illness. It was some sort of complications from appendicitis, where she was in the hospital for several weeks with sort of a mysterious infection of some kind that caused high fevers, and the doctors couldn't quite pin it down. And so she was there for an extended period of time. And during this illness, her husband calls her estranged mother, and her mom comes and visits her. She wakes up one day in the hospital, and her mom is sitting there that she hasn't really talked to in quite a long time. And so the bulk of this book is Lucy recalling this time and these conversations that she had with her mother. But it also dovetails in and out of other observations and memories and reflections, and that is the style of this whole quartet. Lucy's voice and her personality they're a little tricky and very interesting, and I understand why some people don't like these books, don't like the style, don't like Lucy. I get it, but I find her really compelling, even though at some points I think she's kind of full of it, but then at other points I 100% relate to her. Like, I can imagine her being a person that I know and she's a friend, and then sometimes I think, really? And then other times we are just really in sync. That's how I feel about the character Lucy Barton. What we find out in this book is that she comes from an extremely impoverished background. Her family was poor, not only in money and circumstances, but in nurturing and tenderness and care. Her parents they both have serious issues. I think her father has PTSD. They are abusive at times, emotionally, sometimes physically. And she recalls growing up in her early childhood in the garage of her great uncle's house. So imagine, first of all, so the main house it's just an ordinary small house, but he's okay with living in that house by himself and letting his other part of his family, which is a family of 5, all live in the garage. Here's a little description of that garage. Until I was 11 years old, we lived in a garage. The garage belonged to my great uncle, who lived in the house next door, and in the garage there was only a trickle of cold water from a makeshift sink. Insulation nailed against the wall held a stuffing like pink cotton candy, but it was fiberglass and could cut us, we were told. I was puzzled by that, and I would stare at it often. Such a pretty pink thing that I could not touch, and I was puzzled to think it was called glass. Odd to think now how much time it seemed to take up in my head, the puzzle of that pretty pink and dangerous fiberglass we lived right next to every minute. My sister and I slept on canvas cots that were bunk beds, metal poles holding one on top of the other. My parents slept beneath the one window which looked out over the expanse of cornfields, and my brother had a cot in the far corner. At night I would listen to the humming noise of the little refrigerator. It would go on and off. So not until her uncle dies do they move into the actual house proper, but it doesn't really improve their circumstances a whole lot. And we circle back many times in this story to Lucy's upbringing. And this is a major factor throughout the entire series, is the effect of your childhood and the care you received and your relationship with your parents and how that forms you as an adult person. So she has all these conversations with her mother, which are mainly conversations about the people in town and what became of them. And her mother loves to tell stories of people whose seemed like everything was great and then everything went wrong. You know, their husband left or all their kids turned out badly. And just, you know, she loves a good disaster story of a family that seemed to be better off than they were. And they skirt around and around and they never really talk about the things at the core. So if all this sounds intriguing to you, please read this series. And if you're bored, you probably aren't listening anymore and you've skipped ahead to the next book, and that's okay too. I shall do the same right now. So that brings me up to what I'm reading currently, which is sort of Bleak House, although I'm struggling. I don't know if I'm going to keep trying to read this off and on because I have other things in mind. Or should I save it and bring it back and try to read the rest of it for March of the Mammoths? I don't know. Send me a lifeline. But the current book that I'm reading that was completely distracting me from Bleak House is 1984. Julia. It's Julia. It's a retelling of 1984. 1984 is up in the cover, but the title is Julia by Sandra Newman. And I did reread 1984 last year, and I do strongly recommend, if you have not read 1984 ever, you really need to read that before you read Julia. If you have read it and you feel like you have a strong enough memory of it, or you read a good summary of it, you should be okay. You don't have to reread it right away before you read this. It did enhance my reading to have a familiar recent read of that book, because there are a lot of little details and incidents, and when you see the parallel and how it's described from Julia's point of view, or you get more of a backstory about what really happened leading up to things, it does enhance it a lot. And as it often happens in the BookTube universe, just yesterday I saw a video by Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot about this very book. And I watched the first half of his video until he got up to the spoilers, and then I stopped since I am still reading the book. But I was agreeing with everything he had to say. So I'm going to include a link to that video in the notes if you want to hear a dedicated review of just this book. But basically it is the events of 1984 and a little bit extra from the point of view of Julia, who is Winston Smith's love interest in that book. And if you were painfully annoyed by the misogyny and the limited view of women in 1984, you will probably enjoy the expansion of the examination of women's lives in that 1984 world that this book provides. Because with Julia, we get Julia's life in the women's hostel, how women navigate through this world and deal with problems such as the attitudes of men, the fact that it is a society where people are expected to abstain from sex unless they are trying to create an approved child in an approved marriage. But of course, when in the history of human civilization has sex been successfully suppressed? So the Junior Anti-Sex League is full of all kinds of shenanigans, and we find out how people navigate, how people find partners, how people deal with unexpected or unwanted pregnancies and birth control, and basically how you have a sex life in an officially sexless world. And we find out what it means to Julia, why she takes these risks. We find out about her backstory, which gives us some more insight into what the world was like as it transitioned into the world of 1984 since she's younger than Winston is. And so she has a different experience and comes from a different aspect of this world. We have wonderful things like the actual story and history behind that note that she passed to him, because that note had a life before Winston received it. And the plot points do parallel. We rather than have all Winston and a little Julia, we have all Julia and a little Winston. And then we also have O'Brien, the evil O'Brien. And we do also have the parts of 1984 that I don't like kind of resurface in this book because I have to if it's a retelling. And I won't go too much more into that because I haven't even finished the book. So I am waiting to see if the book leaves off like 1984 leaves off, or if there's something different or extra that's in there, because I am pretty close to the end. I think I'll probably read the rest of this book today, and so I'll have more to say about that next week. But I'm really enjoying it. I'm so glad that this book is good. I really wanted it to be good, and then it was just sitting on the shelf at the library for the taking, so I took it, and I am enjoying it very much. So I'm happy to say it's a good book. All right, that is all. I'm going to finish that today, and then I am free as a bird to read whatever I want from my cart for the last couple of days of January. I'm going to be back this weekend with a February, why can't I say it? February TBR. I pretty much have it worked out because I'm that kind of gal. I have lists and plans. And so I think I'm ready to talk about that in a video. And then I also have a tag that I need to do that I am researching and getting a few answers ready for. So those will be coming up. I think that's it for now. Let me know what you have been reading, what you have going on this weekend, and I will be back maybe on Sunday-ish with my February TBR. Until then, have a great weekend. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.